So back in high school, there was this girl I liked. I was 16, she was 15. Her name was Marnie. She had these beautiful brown, kind of twinkling eyes. She had this long brown hair and this melodic laugh. And when she would laugh, she had this tendency to toss her head, and her long hair would float around. And if you were standing close to her, her hair would kind of float right toward you. And I loved that about her because her hair smelled great. Kind of a mixture of fresh flowers and pink bubblicious. It was the 80s. So Marnie had, when she smiled, you could see one of her teeth was just a little bit crooked. And that was okay, though, because her smile was beautiful. And the crooked tooth just made her seem like kind of real, because otherwise she was this like otherworldly creature who didn't even really belong here on Earth. So anyway, I was kind of into her. It took me 3 months to get up the courage to ask her to the Valentine's dance, because she was always hanging around with her best friend, Lauren. And I felt awkward about asking her to the dance in front of an audience. But eventually I got up the courage, and I'm delighted to say that everything went great on our first date. The next day, she still seemed like she wanted to see me. And things just went from there. The next few weeks, we started spending more and more time together. And I got to know not just her, but her friend Lauren. And eventually I spent some time with her family and got to know her 2 brothers, who I'll tell you about today as well. So, infantile esotropia. It's kind of like my first girlfriend. You all know infantile esotropia. It's this huge angle, constant esotropia presenting within the first 6 months of life. And as a pediatric ophthalmologist, infantile esotropia is a fantastic disease to treat because it's a surgical problem. You've got this cute little baby with this huge strabismus everybody's concerned about. You go to the operating room and do this relatively simple strabismus surgery, and almost always the eyes are straighter and everyone's happy. You feel like things are so great, you have this feeling like they're just going to be great forever. So today, I want to deepen your understanding of the spectrum of fusion maldevelopment, which we see initially as infantile esotropia. To expand your thinking, think about the other things in strabismus that go along with it. So if you see those on their own, you'll recognize them as such. And that can help to reduce the risk of misdiagnosis and also unnecessary referral and investigation. As a non-strabismus surgeon, for those of you out there who are not pediatric ophthalmologists, recognizing any of these conditions will also make you look very smart. So I started spending a lot of time with Marnie, and that meant spending a lot of time with Lauren. She was always there, quiet, hair covering her eyes a little bit, quiet voice, never saying too much, but kind of like wallpaper, always there in the background. And I realized if I was going to go any further with Marnie, Lauren was really cramping my style. I came to the conclusion that I was going to need to take care of her. So inferior oblique overaction is a lot like Lauren. It's there in the beginning. You just may not recognize it. It's camouflaged. You're so enamored with the huge angle esotropia that you don't notice that in adduction, one eye is rising up a little bit. So, inferior oblique overaction, to recognize it, remember, in adduction, the eye rises up, and this is potentially a surgical problem. It can be treated initially at the time of the initial surgery for esotropia if it's prominent, or it may be treated later if it clinically presents as significant either in a functional or aesthetic fashion. So as time went on, I realized I was going to need to take care of Lauren, and I'm ashamed to say now that I did what needed to be done. I set her up with my best friend, Ken. With her out of the way, that left me free to spend more time with Marnie, and we started to spend time at her house, where I got to know her brothers, Dexter, or Big D as he was known to his friends, and Fred. Now, Dexter was a big, physically intimidating guy, and at Marnie's house, he tended to lord that physicality over me. So he would come in from working out at the gym in the evening, grab me, put me in a headlock, and give me a noogie. And it got really distressing for me because I never knew when he was going to show up. We'd be sitting on the couch watching a movie, Marnie and I, and Dexter could show up at any time. Dissociated deviation is a lot like Dexter. It's not really a problem in the beginning, but as time goes on, after the esotropia has been diagnosed and potentially surgically treated, you may notice dissociated deviation either years or even decades later, where it can become a functional or aesthetic problem for the patient and for you. So dissociated deviation can be recognized in its most common form as dissociated vertical deviation. And dissociated vertical deviation really looks like all by itself the inferior oblique muscle just starts to contract. So the eye tends to rise up, that's the vertical component. It excyclotorts, and then tends to sometimes drift out a little bit as well. Dissociated vertical deviation is kind of unique in strabismus because it's a monocular phenomenon. So normally if you see a patient with a hypertropia, one eye higher than the other, and you do a cover test, the eyes move together in sync. So you recognize that as a normal hypertropia. With dissociated vertical deviation, with loss of fusion or the patient not concentrating with that eye, the eye will rise up, but on cover test, it simply comes back down without the other eye moving. Like inferior oblique overaction, dissociated vertical deviation can be managed surgically if necessary. The surgical management of dissociated vertical deviation can be challenging, and in general, the results are moderately good. And that's kind of how things went with Dexter. He was her brother, so I couldn't get rid of him completely, but I did convince him to work out at a fancy gym across town so that he wasn't around as much in the evenings when I was over at Marnie's house. The residual problem I had, though, was Marnie's youngest brother, Fred, or Fast Freddy, as he was known to his friends and those in the neighborhood. Fast Freddy was adopted. He didn't really fit in with the rest of the family. In fact, he didn't fit in with society in general. He was really that child where the parents decide after the fact that they've really had too many kids, and they just leave the child to be raised by the other moms in the neighborhood. Nowadays, he probably would have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but back then we didn't know. I just knew that he was always in our business. Even when I would be parked with Marnie in the driveway, just concentrating on her eyes, he would pop up from out of nowhere and bang on the car window to scare me. It was really disconcerting. So latent nystagmus. Latent nystagmus is a lot like Fast Freddy. It appears again later after the original esotropia is first diagnosed. Sometimes there initially, but not as prominent. But it becomes a problem potentially for you and the patient over time. So how to distinguish latent nystagmus from other types of nystagmus? Well, think about Fast Freddy. Latent nystagmus is a jerk. I mean a jerk conjugate horizontal nystagmus. Okay? Latent nystagmus is the only nystagmus which reverses its direction with a change in fixation. And to remember which way it's beating, you'll just remember Fast Freddy. The fast phase is toward fixation. Latent nystagmus also has a tendency to damp or get quieter when the eye is in adduction. So if you cover the right eye, the patient will tend to turn their head like this to get their left eye into adduction so that they see better with the nystagmus damped. The covering of the eye, though, makes the nystagmus worse. So if you want to get the best possible visual acuity on a patient with latent nystagmus, avoid using the opaque occluder to block the vision completely, and instead fog the vision with something like a +5 diopter lens or with a translucent occluder. So there's no surgical treatment for latent nystagmus. Like Fast Freddy, you and your patient just have to live with it. I personally decided that I couldn't live with Fast Freddy, and that's why Marnie and I did not end up going to the spring dance together that year. So this is where we're supposed to go. Oh. In summary, infantile esotropia is the most obvious manifestation of a spectrum of fusion maldevelopment that includes inferior oblique overaction, dissociated deviations, and also latent nystagmus. And hopefully by recognizing these entities, you'll be able to look smart and also recognize this spectrum when you see it as fusion maldevelopment. For the record, things did not work out for Marnie and me in the long term, but I do still accept referrals for infantile esotropia. Thank you.